Hi, everyone. My name is Curtis Nunn, and I bring over 30 years of experience in the contact center industry. My journey spans 10 years working directly in a contact center, 10 years as a programmer, developer, and implementer of contact center solutions, and another 10 years as a pre sale subject matter expert and consultant. As a proud U.S. Army veteran, I've always believed in discipline, teamwork, and breaking down complex concepts into simple, actionable insights. One of the most common questions I've been asked throughout my career is how exactly are calls routed and assigned to agents within the Avaya Elite and Advocate routing solution? It's a topic that comes up frequently, and today I'm going to walk you through it in my own words. The information I'll share is publicly available and can be found in the Avaya documentation, but I'll break it down in a way that's practical and easy to understand. I have added my contact information here, so please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. More than happy to assist. So let's dive in.
So we're going to start with what we call agent surplus condition. Agent surplus, simple terms. I've got a lot of agents sitting around available, and a call comes in. So which agent gets that call? So agent surplus, if you ever hear that term, think I've got more agents than I have calls. We refer to those as agent selection methods in the actual phone system. Some people refer to it as a CM. Think of it as the phone system, and they're actually provisioned that the setting is actually on the hunt group form in the phone system. Some people call it the skill, but in the phone system itself, it's actually called a hunt group. So let's go through some key points. One is if you select EAD, essentially you're saying I want to use skills-based routing. I want to assign proficiency levels to all my agents, and I want to have that as a consideration in when an agent is selected. If you're going to use UCD, just ignore those. We don't use skill levels. It's just let's ignore them completely. It does not matter what levels are assigned to the agents. And then let's look at some additional variables. I do want to point these out because they can have an impact on which of those agents is going to get the call. I'll go into a little bit more detail here in a second, but there's really five here, and then there's an additional one which I'll cover. Most idle agent, basically how long have they been sitting without a call? Least occupied, how much work have they done? There's also what we call aux agent in LOAQ, and the last two here are after call work and aux time. Do we want to consider that time as being idle or actual, what we call like work time, if you will? So those are the five main ones. Let's go to the next slide. The other one I mentioned, there was actually six. This one's kind of important. Again, I will try to my best to explain it in a what we call matrix. But if you wanted to look at this, it's really you have two settings. Do you want it yes or no? I did not mention previously, but one of the things you can do with the phone system at Avaya is you can set these values for all these variables at the system level, system parameters features page. You can set them all up there, and then you can override those settings if you needed to down at the actual agent level. So by agent, or if you will. Like I mentioned, MIA across skills is either yes or no. I will explain it further, but if you want my 2-cent short version of it, it's just if I'm an agent and I have 5 skills assigned to me, and let's say a call comes in for skill 1 and it gives it to me. So I'm the one that's selected, and I talk for a couple minutes on that call. When I come out, make myself available again, should all 5 skills of mine, should that available timer or my idle timer be all at 0 because I took a call? Or should it not? So, and this is important because one of the things we get quite often is someone will call telecom or IT and say, the agent will say something's broken. I got call after call after call right in a row, and the agent's sitting around me. We're just sitting there doing nothing. So something must be broken. I usually go right to this first, this setting, and see what that setting is at. aux agent remains in LOA queue. I kind of called that out one of the things on the previous page, but it's really when they're in, if I'm an agent, I'm in aux work, do I want to count that time as truly work time, or do I not want to count it as work time? And then the last two here are after call agents considered idle and aux idle. Again, very important because agents tend to complain if I'm in aux work for a long time and I make myself available when they should be at 0 seconds available, but if you have the ACW or aux, depending on that setting, it may not do that. And you can kind of see I've got some samples here. I do have a matrix that we'll run through so you guys can see all this. So let's look at a sample flow for agent surplus. Call comes in. First thing it's going to do is it's going to say, once it gets to that vector, into a vector at a queue to skill or skew to split command, it's just a step in there. It's going to say, is there agents available? If there's only one, well, we don't really have anything to evaluate. We just need to actually send that agent the call. In other words, I don't need to evaluate across a bunch of agents because I only have one available. If it's no, I got more than one agent, then I have to determine, am I using EAD or UCD? Am I using skills-based routing or am I not? Let's go down to UCD path. Again, ignore those levels. Check my variables, all that good stuff that I mentioned previously. I need to determine, am I using MIA or LOA? MIA, most idle agent. LOA, least occupied agent. If I go down the LOA path, it's going to evaluate the occupancy or how much, if you want to think of it this way, how much work have they done? Not how long have they been sitting without a call, but how much work have they done? And then route the call to the agent with the lowest occupancy. And I'll explain this further, how that's calculated on a later slide. If it's MIA, just look at how long they've been sitting without a call. And route to the call to the agent that's been setting longest without it. Now remember, we're still on UCD, so we don't care about the levels. However, if we do care about the levels, those levels of the skills, then I need to check my variables again, and I need to check the skill proficiency level of all available agents. In other words, I need to run through kind of like buckets, look at level ones first. I have that, do they have the skill? Are they level 1? And then if there are, it's going to make that decision and say, all right, are we using MIA or LOA? And we kind of repeat that process that we did, that we went through earlier. MIA, LOA, route the call to the agent with the longest idle time, or if I'm going to do LOA, look at the occupancy or how much work they've done. So, and then I'll route to that one. If there's no one with a proficiency level of 1 for that skill, then I just repeat the process. I look at level 2s. If there's none, then I go to level 3s and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to look at that, and I can actually go down to all the way down to 16 different levels before finally, figuring out which agent should get the call. All right, so let's look at the next slide, and this is where the fun begins, because now I'm going to look at what we call a matrix, and we're going to use UCD first. We'll go through some samples, and then we'll do EAD, or skills-based routing. So in this first one, let's just look. We got 3 agents. We're using UCD MIA, so most idle agent. We don't care about the skill levels. And if I look at this and I read it from left to right, all I'm going to do is say, all right, great. How long have they been sitting idle without a call? Now, again, they have 2 skills, and it's going to come into play here in a second. We look at another screen. But for this one, just look. If idle available time, 30, 60, or 90, Jeff's going to get the call because he's been sitting idle longer than the other 2. So that's the first one. Now we have to look and say, let's take this a step further and say, hey, I want to consider their aux time considered idle. Again, same skills, all that good stuff, but I have a column here that says aux agents considered idle. For all 3 agents, it's set to yes. So that means that anytime they've spent an aux, I need to count that as being available or idle. So I've got 15 35 seconds. And then I look to the next column, idle available time, and I have 30, 30, and 45 seconds. So in order to figure out which of the agents should get the call, I simply have to add their aux time and their idle time together. So in this case, Jill's going to get it because she was aux for 30 seconds. And now she's been available for 30 seconds. Add those two. She's now at 60 seconds versus the other two. So that's why it's important to make sure these settings are correct because it could have an impact. Let's take it one step further. Let's look at LOA, and let me explain how LOA works, kind of the calculation works in simple terms. It takes how long have I, as an agent, how long have I been logged in, and how much work have I done? How much time have I spent on ACD calls? That's kind of the out-of-box definition. Is I've been logged in, for example, for John, 2 hours. Been on ACD calls for an hour. I've been busy or been working for 50% of the time. So that's why he gets this one. If I looked at the other two, like Jill there, 3 hours logged in, been on ACD calls for 2 hours, her occupancy's 66, and so on and so forth. That's kind of how it works, kind of straightforward, just how much work have they done. All right, so let's delve into this a little bit further and apply some other settings to it. So now I'm going to say I want to use LOA, but I want the after call work time considered idle. And it would apply for aux. I'm just giving you a different example. But now a sales call comes in, right? And it's going to come in here, and you can see where I have the field says after call ACW considered idle, yes. And you can see each one of these agents have been setting an after call work for an hour. So get your mind around, hey, that hour, don't think of it as being after call work time. Think of it as actually being idle, not doing anything. So if I look to the right, now I have to say, all right, now I need to take that into consideration. Again, John logged in 2 hours, ICD calls. There are, if I looked at this, and a lot of times people look at this and they just can't figure it out. Look at it this way. In a standard contact center, if I don't have ACW agent considered idle, then that's actually work time. They're an after call work. So I would look at this and say, well, if that's really work time, then John here would be occupied for 100% of his time because he's been logged in for 2 hours and he took ACD calls for an hour, but he was doing work, the after call work time, for another hour. So the math is 2 divided by 2 or 100%. However, because I have that after call ACW considered idle set to yes, then I have to look and say, well, how much time did he spend in after call work? So in this case, you're actually at 50% because I stroked that to say, yes, it's considered idle. Hopefully that makes sense. It's a little bit different, I understand, but it's important to understand that setting. Let's go a little bit further. I'm going to give you a scenario with MIA across skills set to no for one of the agents. So if I look at this, again, 3 agents, they have the sales skill, they have the service skill. And however, Jeff has his setting for MIA across skills set to no. So I have to look a little bit further and I have to say, all right, so what are the idle times in skill number 1? In this case, skill 1 was sales. So I look at all 3 agents, 30, 60, 90 seconds. And then I look and say, well, it should be the same for skill number 2 for service. So that's fine. Those should be identical. But when I go across, because I have Jeff here set to no MIA across skills, if I look to the right and I see that I see the idle time, call comes in, it's basically, it's going to look and say, what's the available time? 30, 60, 90. Jeff's going to get the call because he's been sitting there longest. But here's kind of the key is look at that time spent talking to customer. It's going to come into play. Now I say 2 minutes. So kind of keep that into play. Let's go down to the next one. And now what happens is Jeff hung up, so he's now back to being available. If I look at this bottom, what I have to do, this last one I just brought up, is I have to look at the idle time in each skill. And you can see for sales, you see how it changed that to 0, which is fine. It should have done that because they just became available. What it didn't do was look at idle time in skill number 2. And what it did was it said, take his previous value of idle time. Look at Jeff. His previous value of idle time in skill number 2 was 90 seconds. What it did was it actually just added things together. In other words, he was on a call for 2 minutes, 120 seconds. How much time was he idle before, idle previously in skill number 2? 90 seconds. Adds them together, and you can see what it did. It said, okay, his idle time is now 210 seconds. So when I go down to do my evaluation over here to the right, and it says now 150, 180, and 210, he's actually going to get the service call. This is why it's important. This setting has a major impact on how you run your contact center. And this is, again, it's the example I'm giving here is the one where the agents think things are broke because the agent gets call after call after call. You just have to make sure you have that set properly. All right, let's continue on. Now we'll go into EAD. So now we're going to consider those the proficiency levels of the skills. Very similar concept as before, but now we have to go one step further, and we actually have to look at what skill level they have. So here, again, MIA sales calls, we're using skills-based routing. So I need to look, and I can see from this that John and Jeff they have skill 1 assigned to him at a level of 1 versus Jeff has level 3 for sales and also for service in this case. So now we're using skills-based routing. If I look at the idle time, it's 30, 60, 90. But because John and Jill are level 1 for that skill, it's going to evaluate those two first. So 30 and 60. So in this case, Jill gets it. Same kind of deal. We're still going to use, now in this case, we're going to use ox time considered idle. Nothing changed from previously how I explained that. The difference is I have to look at the actual levels first. So in this case, I'm really going to evaluate John and Jeff because they both have the sales skill at a level 1. Jill's kind of out of the mix right now. So now I'm just going to evaluate those two, and I can see that Jeff's at 50 seconds and John is at 45. Remember, we're considering ox time as idle here. So Jeff gets this call. LOA, same deal. Separate your buckets. Look at the levels first. Go down. And in this case, I got Jill and Jeff both are assigned level 1 for sales. And then I do my math and I look at this. And, it's pretty straightforward. I'm comparing 66% versus 75%. The one that's done the least amount of work is Jill. Ignore John because he's a level 2 for that skill. Let's take it a step further. Same deal for LOA. We're going to consider after call work considered idle. Same concept. I know I'm being repetitive, but look at the levels. Look at the skill, then look at the level. So if I looked at this and I see that John has, the cells, John is at a level 3, Jill's at level 2, Jeff's at level 3. Well, guess what? I only have one agent at 2. So they're going to get the call regardless because it's going to look at them first. If it didn't, let's say that for some unknown reason, Jill was not part of this, or maybe she was a skill level of 3 also for skill 1, then I would look across all 3 and figure out which agent to deliver it to. Next one, we're doing MIA across skills. That metric I mentioned before, Or do I reset the timer to 0 on all the skills or not? And again, we're coming down. We just need to look at the levels. We need to say, hey, it's a sales call. I can see in here that I need to compare John and Jeff because they are level 1 for sales. And I go down through and I look at my timers and I look at, which one did I give it to? In this case, I gave it to Jeff. And then he was on the call for 90 seconds. Step further, now a service call comes in. Which one do I give it? Which agent am I giving that to? So again, we're using skills base, so I need to look at that level for in this case, skill number 2, because if I looked at this, the call, I'm actually pointing out that it's a service call coming in. Now I can see again that the skill 1 or the sales queue that Jeff's back at 0, but for idle time in skill 2, he's at 180 seconds now. And then I just compare. Now, you might look at this and say, well, why is that happening like that? Well, skill 2 level, the service skill for all 3 agents is 1. So I need to evaluate all 3. So now I simply go to the right and I say, all right, what's the idle available time for the service call? Here, service call, how long have they been setting? And in this case, I'm going to give the call to Jeff. All right, so let's move on to something else. And what we're going to talk about here is call surplus. We covered agent. I got agent sitting around, and a call comes in. What happens if I've got calls in queue and I don't have agents available? And then one of those agents becomes available. They make them. They get off a call and they make themselves available. Which of the calls in queue are they actually going to get? There is the way this is set. You can set it up. It's at the actual agent profile screen. There's a call selection field where you determine that, and we'll go through each one of those and how they impact that. Now, obviously, you can actually set this. You can make those changes in the CMS or reporting system, or you can do it in the actual phone system or the CM itself. So let's look at how these work. So one of the things I do need to point out is there is one global setting that you have to be careful with. And again, it's under system parameters features. Are you going to use current wait time or predicted wait time? Now, in previous years, when we had something called Advocate, and we still do, it used to be years and years ago, it was kind of one of those optional things you had to pay for, if you want to, so to speak, to use Advocate. And when you did that, then you get the predicted wait time functionality. We don't do that anymore. You can select. We don't charge for Advocate, none of that. So you're either going to say current wait time. In other words, if I got a lot of calls in queue, just deliver the one that's been waiting longest. If I use predicted, if I set that to predicted, instead of just delivering the one that's been waiting longest, it's going to do kind of this what if scenario. If it doesn't get answered, how much longer is it going to have to wait? And I'll show you how this all kind of comes together. But kind of keep that in mind, because it's one of those questions I get. Somebody will ultimately look in CMS and they will see they're watching, how many the calls in queue, and they see how long they've been waiting. And the oldest call waiting doesn't necessarily get answered next, and they think something's broke. The first thing I do is go, are you using predicted or using current wait time? Because that matters here, because it's not necessarily the oldest call waiting that's going to be delivered next. All right, so at the agent profile, there are a couple things to understand. Greatest need is one of those settings, and it really just means when I hang up as an agent, I make myself available, and there's calls in queue, just ignore the skill levels, or just ignore them completely, because greatest need says just wipe those out, give me the call that's been waiting the longest at the highest priority, which I'll discuss, or the one that has the longest predicted wait time. If you want to do skill level, change that to skill level, again, it's going to take into account, it's going to look at the, an agent became available, there's 5 calls waiting. it's going to say out of those 5 calls that are waiting, all different skills, it's going to try to send that agent, the one that's been waiting the longest or predicted to wait the longest for their highest skill level. And I'll explain that in the matrix. We also have another feature called service objective. We're seeing this used a lot more, believe it or not now. It used to be that with Avaya, and it still exists, you have priorities, so you can queue the calls up to skills at different priorities. But we were always kind of is either low, medium, high, or top. Those are your 4. What service objective allows you to do is make that more of a ratio or a numeric value. Now, if you're going to use this, I always tell it, you don't have to follow this, but my guide is if you're going to use service objective to kind of prioritize calls to different skills, make sure that when you queue the call up in a vector that you maybe set them all to medium priority. Otherwise, we're doing a separation by priority, and then we're applying an actual service objective. You can still do that. I just like to normalize things across the board. And I'll explain how this works as well in a further slide. I also have another option called VDN service objective and dynamic queue position. Those are actually, you set those up, a combination. Dynamic queue position, you're going to set that at the hunt group form. And I forgot to mention, if you're going to use service objective, that's also set at the hunt group form. So BDN service objective, dynamic queue position. The dynamic queue position is actually set on the hunt group form. And the VDN service objective is set up on the VDN screen in the phone system. And what it really does is if a new call comes in and there's calls already waiting for that skill, where should I put that next call in the priority line? So if I had 5 calls waiting, for example, for a skill, and another call came in, and it goes down and it says, all right, I need to queue to the skill in the vector. Do I put it at position 6 or do I put it at position 3? And that's where the VDN service objective really comes into play. It kind of allows you to put new calls in the correct order in the wait line. And then I point out here the following conditions also impact call selection. Make sure if you're going to do this, DQP and VDN service objective, then we need to make sure you assign this correctly. If you don't have DQP enabled, for example, on all the skills that the agent could take calls for, it's going to default down to the service objective value for each skill. And again, I'll cover this. I'll explain how it works. I always tell people if you're going to use it and you're going to use DQP, set up all the skills to use it and then use your VDN service objective because it does have an impact. There's one additional. This is for advocate. And technically, service objective and VDN service objective, dynamic queue, those were part of the advocate solution, which you have today. But if you can also do things what we call reserve agents. In other words, you have 2 levels, R1 and R2. You can make certain agents available to get a call from a queue if certain parameters are met. So, and it's usually the call comes in, we look at expected wait time, and then we compare it against some thresholds that are defined on the hunt group form in the phone system. And we have to make a decision. Do I need some R1 agents or do I need R1s and R2s? And I'll explain this further. It'll make more sense. Oh, I did want to point out, and this kind of is a big one. R1 is actually a proficiency level of 15, and R2 is actually proficiency level of 16. And you'll understand that when we go through the next couple slides. All right, let's do a flow really quick. And I'm going to use the flow based upon current wait time. So how long have the calls been waiting in queue? First thing I need to do is I need to say when a call comes in and hits that Q2 step in the vector, I need to say, are we using dynamic queue position or not? And if it's no, then I say, all right, are we using reserve agents? If, for example, DQP or dynamic queue position is turned on for all the skills. Then I need to check the service objective on the VDNs and insert the call in the queue line based upon value. In this case, I wanted to make sure you guys understood that the service objective is the number of, and on a VDN is actually technically the number of seconds this call should be answered in. So in other words, 20 seconds is greater than 30 seconds. 20 seconds is a higher priority, if you will. If reserve agents are not enabled, then I'm just going to separate the calls into buckets. Basically all these calls are in there. I've got some queued up high, I got some queued up medium, I need top. I always tell people, think of all those calls are in separate buckets now in the phone system. If you are using reserve agents, then what I need to do is I need to look at the expected wait time for that call. And I need to compare it against some thresholds I set up on the actual hunt group or the skill in the phone system. So you have two. You don't have to use both. I tell people all the time to put in like 30 seconds for threshold 1 and maybe 120 for threshold 2. Whenever I tell people and I try to explain reserve agents, put some value in there in both, and that way you can run some reports and see when you're hitting threshold 1 and threshold 2 before you actually start assigning reserve agents. It's just a good way to do it. Now, there is an optional setting. You can also say, hey, maybe the call came in and it evaluated expected wait time, but it didn't hit one of the thresholds up front. Well, you can also say, if the call's been waiting in queue for so long, I can have it then again say, if this call's been waiting longer than one of the thresholds, I want to bring in some reserve agents. I always tell people, think of this as you're catching the call up front, and then you're catching the call, we're checking against for that call while it's actually waiting in queue. So kind of before and after. So you can have both. You don't have to have Otis call waiting enabled if you don't want to. It's just an optional setting. And again, we have the separation. So an agent becomes available and has all this, applicable skills assigned to them. Top always looked up first. So if I've got all these calls in queue, it's going to say, are there any waiting at top? And I need to evaluate those to figure out which one I should deliver to the agent. If there's not, then it's going to go down to high, then medium, then low. So then it's going to go through and say, all right, am I using service objective? Remember I mentioned service objective. You could set that at the hunt group form. So are we going to use that or are we not going to use it? And again, I'll explain this further when we go through the matrix so I can show you the examples. But you have to say, are we using it or are we not using it? And then we say, hey, no, it's not being used. Well, what call selection method is assigned to the agent? Greatest need or skill level? If it's greatest need, it's just going to come in and say which call has been waiting the longest. We're going to ignore the levels. And again, remember, we got those priority buckets, but it's just going to be the one that's waiting longest. If it's skill level, it's first going to say, all right, I need to look at those levels of the agents. So, and then go down and say, all right, if they're level 1 for all these skills, then I need to evaluate and say, which call should I deliver to them? But I'm taking into account how proficient they are for those skills. So again, it's waiting the longest based upon the level of the skills assigned to the agent. If you're using service objective, we're gonna do a calculation. We're basically gonna take what's the current wait time for those calls, and we're gonna divide that by what the service objective value is on the skill or the hunt group in the phone system. And then, so it's going to do a ratio. It's going to determine that. And then it's going to say, all right, we still need to look at call selection again. And if it's greatest need, ignore the skill levels, but whichever call has the highest ratio at that point, it's going to be delivered. And if it's skill level, we're simply going to go down and look and say, we're going to look at the levels first, and we're going to deliver the one with the highest ratio there. And again, make sure you consider that what level of the skill, what level for each skill the agent has. Now let's look at predicted wait time. I'm going to skip through pretty quick through this one. We're still going to do dynamic queue position check. We're going to look for advocate reserve. We're going to flow just like the other one. We're going to separate those calls into buckets. We're going to check expected wait time for the reserve agents. We're going to look at that optional setting. We're going to come down, agent becomes available. We've got our priority rules. We're going to look at service objective again. Same as it before. Difference is, remember, we're using predicted wait time, and I'll show you where that comes into play. So we're going to look at call selection method, greatest need. So what we're really doing is we're going to route the call that has the highest predicted wait time to the agent. For again, ignore the levels. Predicted is really how long have you waited and how much longer will you have to wait if I don't deliver this call to the agent. And you'll see that when I show you in the matrix, but just think of it as it does this, I call it what if scenario. When that agent becomes available, it's going to do all this stuff, it's calculate this predicted wait time, and then it's going to use that in delivering the call. And it'll make more sense when you see the matrix, I promise. All right, so we're at skill level, evaluate the skill, the proficiency levels, and again, the difference here is we're looking at that predicted wait time. If we're using service objective, we're going to look at that predicted wait time value, and we're going to divide that by the service objective value on the hunt group or the skill. Again, what call selection, and now the highest ratio. Again, just like we did previously. And then we have skill level, and so on and so forth. So the big difference is it's highest predicted wait time, not longest, the one that's been waiting the longest in queue. All right, so let's start with current wait time. We're going to use that as our overall selection, how long the call's been waiting. So here's how it would work. If I look at this, first one, call selection at the agent, John here. It's greatest need, calls are waiting, queues. We look at priorities, and we're going to ignore the levels that he's assigned for those skills. Pretty straightforward. The first thing I have to do is separate my buckets. And I can see skill 2 and skill 3 are both at medium priority. However, skill 1's at low, so I'm not going to even deal with skill 1 right now. No levels involved, skill levels. Simply compare 2 and 3, what the wait time is. And in this case, skill number 2 is going to get delivered. If I have call selection for John set to skill level, I have to take it one step further. I need to go in and say, all right, great, I need to check my priorities. So we're still looking at, in this case, skill 2 and skill 3 because they're at the same priority. However, skill 3, billing, John is much more proficient in, so he's a skill level 1 there, and for service, he's a skill level 2. So while you might think that skill 2 should be delivered, that's not the case because he's more proficient at skill number 3. So that is the one that would be selected. If we look at service objective, which I remember I mentioned that you could apply, that's an optional setting that you could turn on. You do have to do it at the agent level. You have to say, I want greatest need, and I want to check the box for service objective. So it's another way of making sure he gets the correct call. And again, I come down through here, greatest need, we're going to ignore those skill levels, and we're simply going to say, look at priority. So I'm evaluating 2 and 3, skills 2 and 3. And I'm going to look at this. In this case, I need to see the wait time for skill 2, and I need the wait time for skill 3. But I need to look at that value on the hunt group or the hunt group form in the phone system. I need to check that service objective value. And then I need to do some simple math. If I come in here and say skill 2 is 120 seconds waiting, and the service objective for that skill is 50. My ratio is 2.4. If I apply the same logic for skill 3, it's 60 divided by 10, and the ratio is 6. So you can see that skill 3 is going to be delivered because it has a higher ratio. If I use skill level instead of greatest need, but I still have service objective, again, Separate your calls by priority. So we're looking at what? Skills 1 and skills 2 because they're both at medium. I need to apply my service objective rule. And then I need to take it one step further and actually look at the skill, what level, skill 1, what's his level, and skill 2, what's his level. They're equal, so I'm just evaluating those straight because he's a level 1 in both. So I'm just going to say, hey, great, you're equal in both. Which one has the highest ratio? Well, 3 is greater than 2.4, so that is the call gets delivered. Now, if we look and we kind of throw another curveball in there, I mentioned dynamic queue position and BDN service objective briefly in a previous discussion. The rule is if all these skills, right? So he has a skill, but he has all these VDNs that point to that same skill. A lot of people do this. I've seen people have hundreds of VDNs all pointed to one single skill. And what we really need to do is say, all right, so if all those VDNs and if that skill has, you need to make sure it's either it's either all or nothing, or there's a mix. In other words, for this skill, for example, in this case, skill number 1, I have DQP enabled, but John may have other skills where he doesn't have DQP enabled. And that's important because if you look at that last section, it says apply skill service objective. That's if you have a mix. So if he has some skills that don't have DQP turned on and others that do, we have to use something to determine which call to give him. It's not quite as straightforward. So if I say this, if you look at this, all I'm doing is coming in, calls waiting, I come in here, it's one skill, but multiple VDNs have pointed to it. Priority doesn't really apply here because it's just medium because it's only one skill. But what I need to do is I need to make sure when I compare things, I need to look at VDN 1's wait time, VDN 2's, and VDN 3's. And then I need to look at the service objective for that skill. Remember, we just one skill with multiple VDNs. So VDN 1 is 90 divided by the skill service objective, 90, ratio is 1, and so on and so forth. Do the same for VDNs 2 and 3. Whichever one has the highest ratio, that is getting delivered. So now if I come in here and let's say, well, what if every skill that John has DQP enabled? What we're going to do, we don't really care at this point. The service objective is set at the VDN in this case. So I can come in here and say, all right, great. I don't really have the skill service objective value is really not even applicable now. It's what we care about here is what position did we put that call in queue. So again, you can see VDN 1, the service objective was 90. So that's in position 3. VDN 2, service objective is 30, and VDN 3, it's actually 20. So the key here is when that call came in, where did we put it in the queue line? Well, we're going to put the billing call at position 1. So that is the call he will get. It's basically just, hey, it's in position 1. That's fine. It's, we know it's at the top of the queue. We're just going to deliver that call. It's a little bit confusing. I know everybody seems to get confused with this, but if you use VDN service objective and DQP, dynamic queue position, and it's enabled for all the skills, what we're going to do is we're simply going to use the VDN service objective value to figure out where to put the call in the queue line. Now, I know if you looked at this, I said Otis call waiting. Well, it's still applicable. You could have a lot of different VDNs and skills, and so everything you could have multiple calls in position 1 for all these different skills. You still have to deliver on the Otis call waiting. It's just we know they're all at queue position 1. A little bit confusing, but that's the way it works. So if we use predicted wait time, all we're doing is one additional step. We still look at priorities. I'm using greatest need for the first one here. We're going to ignore the levels. I separate my buckets for priority. I need to look at skill number 2 versus skill number 3 in this case because they're both medium. I still care about their wait time. However, what you're seeing here is the big one is your advance time. So that's your what if scenario. So if I do not deliver the service call to the agent, in this case, how much longer is it going to have to wait? And that's what we call advance time. So I need to take that into calculation. And I simply need to add the two metrics together. How long have they currently waited? Plus their advance time. So predicted wait time for skill 2 is now at 150. And skill 3 is at, 140 plus 5. So the predicted wait time there is 145. So obviously skill number 2 is the higher predicted wait time. That's the one that's going to get delivered. I'm not going to go into detail on the algorithm, of how it actually works, but it's really, in simple terms, it's based upon a lot of factors going on in the CM, like staffed agents, how many agents are in aux, how long does it take for a call to move one position in the queue line? How long did it take for it to, if I was in position 4, how long did it take to move to position 3? And then what position? So there's a whole algorithm behind it, but just kind of keep in mind that's what the advanced time is. All right, so let's do call selection, skill level. We're again same as before. The only difference is we have to look at obviously priorities, then we look at skill levels for the agents, and then we evaluate the predicted wait time. So in this case, I could see skill 3 is rolled out because it's medium. The other 2 are high. I have advanced time, I have predicted wait time, all that good stuff. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and, I'm sorry. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I remember I said you had to evaluate the level. Almost have myself confused there. If you look at the level of the skills, skill 2, while it's the same priority, he's actually a level 2 for service, and he's a level 1 for sales. So even though the predicted wait time for skill 2 is 240, we're going to deliver the one that went to skill number 1 because he's a higher, he's more proficient in that one. If we do service objective, and this time greatest need, calls are going to come in, same deal, different skills. We still have to look at priorities. I know it's kind of repetitive, but I just want to kind of make sure you guys understand we have to separate those calls. We don't care about levels in this case. However, what we do care about is we've got our advance time, our wait time, our predicted wait time. We want to apply that service objective value that we set on the hunt group form. So it's just like the other one. The only difference is we're using predicted wait time rather than current wait time. So we have the ratio, and in this case, we're going to select skill number 2, which is service. Skill level, just like the other one, the only difference is check priority, then check your levels that the agent's assigned for each one of those skills. In this case, in this example, we're evaluating skills number 2 and 3. However, for skill number 2, he is a level 3. He's proficiency level 3 in service versus 1 for billing. So we're going to just deliver that call. And again, you still have to have the ratio because we're using service objective. This is at DQP and it not enabled. In other words, this agent, John, has multiple skills, but some of them have DQP on, some of them do not. Remember what I said, it's just going to come in and it's going to say, I need to apply the service objective value of the skill in this case. Not at the VDN, at the skill. The only difference really right here is your VD. Because it's all going to one skill, we need to evaluate the VDNs. We need to say, all right, what's the wait time for VDN 1? 90 seconds. What is it for VDN 2? 150. What is it for VDN 3? 120. All that good stuff. So now we're looking at that and we're just applying, we're coming in and saying, what's the wait time? Divide that by the skill service objective. Kind of call that out, and it give me my ratio and decide which one should be delivered. And lastly, if I come in here and this time all the skills that John has assigned to him have DQP enabled, then we're going to look and we're going to say, what position are the calls in? All the ones that are in position one, based upon how the VDN service objective is set. Remember, what we're talking about here is when that call comes in queues, that Q2 step in the vector, I need to know where to put this call in line. Like 10 calls in queue already. Do I need to put it in position 5, 4, 3, maybe even 1? But I need to see that VDN service objective value to figure out how to line up the queues. So again, they're all in here. We know that. And then we're just going to look if he has first multiple calls waiting in different VDNs and different skills. We're just going to look and say, all right, in position 1, I got all these calls. Which one has the highest predicted wait time? The biggest thing here is just kind of harping on that point is when you use DQP and VDN service objective together, we are going to just line the calls up correctly.